About a month ago, I shared with you the making of a Victorian Jane Eyre-inspired wool cape. The cape is warm and has seen much use since then, but it was lacking any form of embellishment or decoration. This obviously cannot stand, so let us spend an extraordinary amount of time making a thin strip of edging lace that no one but a select few will even know what is. I played briefly with the idea of edging the cape in bobbin lace, but with a certain furry friend's penchant for pulling pins out of anything within reach, I settled for much smaller and a lot more portable tatting lace instead. I am by no means a tatting expert. I was given a used shuttle that a good friend of mine acquired from a crafty hoard, but I had only made a handful of centimeters with it so far. Not to mention all the thread mutants strewn about from numerous tries before I finally cracked the transferring of the not absolute essentials of tatting. But more on that in a moment. One thing I really like about tatting is that it requires very little in terms of tools. A shuttle, a crochet hook, or a shuttle with a hook on it, a pair of scissors, and a spool of slippery thread such as silk or mercerized cotton, and you're good to go. You start by winding the shuttle. There is a hole in the shuttle for threading usually, but as I'm trying to show how the knot moves, I'm using this thick multicolored wool that is just too thick to thread through the hole in my shuttle. Curiously, and a big reason to get two identical spools of thread is that for a lot of patterns you do not cut the thread before you begin. This helps reduce how often you need to wrestle with knots in your work, which is a time. At its essence, tatting is a series of slip knots done alternatively over or under your core thread, optionally with some distance between them to create what are known as picots or decorative loops. These loops can also be useful in connecting different parts of your work so that you get a neater result. The most important thing to learn in order to get nice tatting lace is transferring the knot from our shuttle thread to the loop thread. This ensures that our shuttle thread can continue to move freely inside the series of knots and allows us to tighten the loop when we are done to a ring much smaller than our shuttle. In the beginning, I could not understand why my shuttle thread would not move, even though I did my best to ensure the knot was on the right thread. It turned out that, being used to weaving where tighter is better, I was tatting far too tightly. A little practice loosening things up, and suddenly my loops were moving as they should. In order to leave more than thin thread between our tatting rings, we return to the thread from the spool. Keeping this thread under tension while you work requires a bit of witchcraft, but it can be done. Several tatting instructors recommend winding the thread around your pinky fingers multiple times to create that tension. But since I was under a deadline, I found the winding and unwinding took too long and opted instead to squeeze it along my work between thumb and index finger. Also turning the work around to get the knots on the right side. The subsequent ring is created much like the first, with the added difference that the first picot is connected to the previous ring by means of our crochet hook. Practice out of the way, let us move on to our actual lace. And as I quickly found out, moving between threads means you need to relearn appropriate tightness and distance between picots to achieve a balanced result. So learn from my mistakes and don't fill the shuttle completely your first time around with a new thread, only to have your first ring be super wonky and frustrating. For this project, I have a spool of grey 30/2 normal metric silk that I think will play nicely. Silk is good because it is slippery, a feature you will come to appreciate when you inevitably make mistakes and need to undo some knots. To sew on our freshly finished lace, we will need to figure out the order and placement of our stitches. By figuring out our stitch order, we can carefully send our needle from one stitch to the next between the lining and the fabric. When done correctly and carefully, we should not see stitches on the lining side, which means our color will still look sharp without having to unpick all the edges. You can see me struggling profusely here to figure out exactly how I want the stitch order to go for each repetition of the pattern. Here you can see I got the stitch order down and can work a little faster. It is still slow work, as each repetition required 5 individual stitches and required turning the work repeatedly. Add to this that 1.5 repetition of the pattern were only 1 centimeter and I needed 6.5 meters, and you can see why this took 2 full days of stitching. But we are not quite done without a little bit of decorative loopage. I think our cape closure will look really good with a little teardrop loop of lace right next to it. This also hides how the cape closures dig into the area where the lace is supposed to go, making it a feature instead. This little strip of lace is really quite flexible and succumbed to my easing efforts with relative ease. It only took a bit of time, patience, and a handful of pins to get neat, even results on both sides. And with that, our friend is finally, actually complete. I had so much fun with this project. It was a lot of work, but not a lot of fitting and muttering indecencies under one's breath at mockups that don't want to cooperate. All in all, it was a very nice way to start 2021, and I think a valiant effort for the Foundations Revealed competition. Though, I must say, I don't think I would have completed the lace, and certainly not in that time frame, had there not been a competition afoot. Next, I think it's time to really get started on this historically inspired natural fiber wardrobe I wanted to create for well over a decade, from the bottom and up. I hope to see you there.